So today I'm hosting a discussion between two very outspoken vegans who have almost the complete opposite views on how we should help animals.
Changing the message to, well, just reduce then. Will you at least cut out meat 3 times a week? That not only seems ineffective, but it seems counterproductive.
I see taking steps towards going vegan also as successes, because
I don't know why you would even say that to me.
convincing people, vegans one by one, until we have enough of them, I don't see that happening.
Who cares what non-vegans say? This kind of shit actually bothers me.
And saying that, like, yeah, the ones who are not ready, I think that's kind of lame.
There's nothing that convinces me that telling people to eat less meat is going to get them to understand the injustice better.
I'm here with Paul Bashir, the co-founder of the activism group Anonymous For The Voiceless, and Tobias Leenaert, author of the book How to Create a Vegan World. Now, to start off with you guys, I'd like you to sort of like warm up a bit and get into the mood, I suppose, to have a big discussion, an important discussion. Could you want each of you to give me like a quick, like 1 to 2 sentence intro for yourself? So Tobias, do you want to start with yours?
Yeah, I've been into animal activism, vegan activism for 25 years. Wrote the book you mentioned, co-founder of ProVeg and other initiatives. And I blog at tobiasleenaert.substack.com.
Okay, Paul?
I've been vegan activist for 13 years now. Started AV roughly 10 years ago now. Been heavily involved in street activism.
I want to establish something that's really important, that I know you both personally. I call you both friends, and I know that you're both in this for the right reasons, that you both genuinely want to make the world a better place for animals. You want to change the world for animals. But let's give the audience a bit of an idea of what they're in for with your disagreements before we kick into it and give you guys the microphone. So you guys have quite opposing views. So Paul, your general view, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, by the way, is that veganism is the non-negotiable baseline. So anything less than veganism is animal abuse. And you believe that meat eaters must be held directly accountable, even if that means confrontation. I think that's a pretty fair representation. Would you agree?
Yeah, I wouldn't say, I mean, I actually put the bar at vegan activism.
Okay.
And this is something that has been part of AV's mission statement since we started, but we've only clarified this and provided more structure around how we deliver this in the last sort of 5 years, especially in the last 2 years. Especially in this last campaign, we made a very clear update in how we deliver this.
Okay, so vegan activism is actually a moral baseline. Then that gives an even better understanding of where you're at. And Tobias, you believe that veganism is just a means to an end, but not the end in itself. You support reduction as a step forward, and probably your most controversial point is that in some very specific cases, you believe that eating something or whatever it is, using something non-vegan could help animals more in the long run, which has been probably your most contentious point that you've made publicly. And we'll get into that in detail, I'm sure, about that today as well. Again, is that a fair representation of?
Yeah, although I'd say that last bit is not part of my theory of change. It's just an illustration, or I use it to illustrate different views of looking at this.
Fair enough. I was only using it to give people an idea of that kind of core disagreement that you're likely going to have today. So this isn't just like a pointless debate about tactics. I truly believe that the way we approach all of this could mean the difference between millions of animals continuing to suffer and be exploited, or being spared and like changing the world. So it's really important that we have these discussions. And with that, so Paul, you actually told me that after watching my last interview with Tobias that you saw some big holes in his position. So let's start with you and let's ask the question, what stands out to you as the most flawed or dangerous points from your side and Tobias's position, and or wherever you want to start, basically, with those kind of poking those holes. And Tobias, don't worry, you'll get your chance later on to turn the tables and ask Paul some questions a little later as well. So Paul, when you're ready.
So my question is to better understand your position, Tobias, because this is the first time I'm talking to you, so I don't think going off one YouTube video is enough to understand your position properly. And I only saw the one thing that you did with David. I haven't seen all of the videos you've done with David or anything else really from your work. I'm pretty deeply entrenched in my own work, so I don't really. There's a lot of people I don't really know too much about. I know a bit about your book, but I haven't read it, and so I'd like to just ask you what your position is exactly on this, because from watching the video that I watched with you and David, what I understood was that you were basically saying that it's more effective to speak in a way to non-vegans that would encourage them to do things like Meatless Mondays.
Yeah.
Am I off base, or is that
No. So
is that your position?
yeah, I would say my top principle is that trumps all the other ones is that we need a multitude of approaches, and we need to be flexible in our approaches and see what works for which people or in which situation. So that's one important thing. But to address what you are saying about the meat reduction ask, so you have to understand the theory of change that I set out in my book, which is about a multitude of big masses of reducers being responsible for driving demand and thus supply of vegan products. So if you have the chance today to drink a lot of plant-based milks, that is not because of the vegans, that is because of the demand from reducers who, for whatever reason, to whatever degree, consume vegan milk. And I think that this supply, this option that we have to have easy access to alternatives, makes it easier for people to shift more and more to the vegan end of the spectrum. And so I think for system change, encouraging many people to reduce is going to get us there faster. And what I ultimately want to do is create a fertile breeding ground for your activism. So what I want to do is have a situation in which people can still much easier than today go vegan, and they don't need all the moral motivation as a start. And so they have already the experience that there are good products and they're qualitative and they're tasty and it's convenient, etc. And then they feel that there's less sacrifice to be made, and then the heart and the mind opens to listen to those animal rights messages that you are quite eloquently often telling them. So I think that to a large extent, it's where you stand depends on where you sit. So whether people can hear the message that you bring to them depends, or whether they're going to be vegan, what they believe depends on their position, which is a very ingrained position of eating meat. And to a certain extent, you could say that, like, as long as people eat meat every day, there's very little openness to hear those messages because they think there's so much to lose. So I hope that clarifies it a little bit.
Yeah, I think it does, but I just want to clarify one thing here, which is my specific question about your position is, do you think it's more effective to promote a reducetarian message than it is to promote a direct, truthful message?
It depends. At a large scale, like say you give me $10 million or $1 billion to have like a large advertising campaign, I think I would share a reducetarian message rather than a vegan message at this point in time. I would maybe not do that in 10 years or in 20 years or I don't know what, but at this point in time, I think I would do that because we know from studies that the uptake of such an ask is bigger than when you ask people to go vegan. And if we have many people following up on that ask, we can actually drive demand and supply and create system change in which then later a vegan ask will become more effective. I'm not saying that we should not have vegan asks now, and I often ask people to go vegan, but not consistently, and I adapt it to the person and the situation that I have in front of me. And I don't consider this a betrayal. I consider this what I think is the most effective thing I can do to end animal suffering and exploitation as fast as possible.
So my response to that is, are you open to being wrong about the fact that what you're doing creates fertile grounds for my work? Are you open to the fact that it actually makes my work harder?
I'm open to I'm open to being wrong, definitely. And yeah, please tell me where you think it makes you work harder.
Okay, so I've spoken to about 30,000 people myself directly on the streets, but my job is to lead and provide a platform for others to speak to. I mean, AV's done over 25,000 cubes around the world in over 1,000 cities. So I'm constantly feeding off people and their feedback in the organization. The work that they're doing on the ground is something I'm vicariously living through because I'm always getting feedback about how the conversations are going and providing leadership and guidance on what they should do to navigate conversations. The outreach element of the cubes is actually, I think, even more important than the art installation itself, the cube itself. But both go hand in hand. And what we find on outreach a lot of the times is we get people that are either vegetarian or one of the Aryans, right? The flexitarians, the reducitarians. And they're actually harder to talk to than regular non-vegans who have never actually come across the message before. The reason why is because they feel entitled, and there's only so many times that you can actually bring someone to the table and ask them to do the right thing. I don't see I know that I came into this debate knowing that you're going to refer to data and studies a lot. And I know that you do this quite a lot. I mean, based on what I saw in the video with you and David. But when you're out there in the real world actually doing the activism, this is what we're getting. We're getting more people than not. I would say 80% of the people that have come across some kind of plant-based reduced message, their friends are plant-based, they've told them to eat less meat, or they heard from somebody that did it for weight loss, so they're trying it out, and meatless Mondays was happening at their workplace, so they joined in, or whatever it was. These people feel entitled because they feel like they're already doing enough. They're not as receptive and they're not as open as people who have never come across this message before. That's generally our experience.
Yeah. So I think there's truth in what you're saying, in that there can be an effect of complacency. So like when we advocate for reduction or whatever, then some people can definitely get the impression that's like reduction is okay and they can be part-time animal eaters or whatever. I think the difference between you and me is that I see a large percentage of, or a large share of reducers as a win. I think you have like this all or nothing stance where only a vegan is good or a vegan activist is good. I see a mass of reducers as contributing to the solution. So I'm not despairing when I see, I mean, people have to really do it. I mean, there's definitely people who say like, I'm already reducing and they're not doing anything. But there's definitely quite an amount. I just heard 50% in UK, for instance, quite an amount of people who are reducing. And if you all do that together, then I think that is systemic change and is leading to more change. And I don't think that we need to convince people one by one to go vegan. I think that if we have, and I don't know what these numbers are, but if we have a certain percentage of people that are a certain percentage vegan, then the system will topple and things will take care of themselves. So I'm not looking just at the number of vegans and how difficult or how easy it is to make people vegan. I think that's one part of the puzzle, but there's other parts of the puzzle which I think are basically more important still.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've made this claim that if you had $1 billion to put into one approach right now, you would put it into reducitarian messages. But that's literally all the vegan movement has been about since it began, pretty much. I don't see how now is any different to 30 years ago. I mean, I think since 2010, roughly, we've had like mostly reducitarian messages. And even since 2010, there's been I would say most of the vegan movement is reducitarian messages and welfare messages. So I don't know why you feel like there's even more of a need for that. I also don't have this mentality that it's all or nothing. It's just justice or what are we doing? You know, that's my position. Like, there's no, I know you're going to refer to data and stuff like that, but there's nothing that convinces me that telling people to eat less meat is going to get them to understand the injustice better. I don't see how that lines up. I see that there's either people who are open to the fact that they're living in hypocrisy, that they're saying they respect animals while disrespecting them in the worst possible ways, or they're not. And I think that if they eat less meat, I don't like, yeah, that there may be a case for some people where that opens them up more, but I also see the case where people who reduce, like I see this more often than not, especially with my outreach experience, that they're just simply open, and if they're open, then they should be given the direct message from the beginning. And I also think that with your approach, people never actually get the correct, clear vegan message. Whereas with my approach, they get the clear vegan message plus your message, in essence, because if they decide to not do what I'm asking them to do, they'll end up reducing at best. Like, they end up potentially reducing as a result. But with your message, they never actually get this I need to be vegan moral obligation message. They never really get that. Unless they, by chance, stumble across a vegan activist who actually gives them that message. But I don't think that that is a very good chance. I don't see how like that is going to increase the chances of that happening. I think that we run the risk of them never actually stumbling across another person who talks about veganism ever again. These conversations we have with people on the streets, we keep in mind that this may be the only time they ever encounter a vegan activist. They may never actually have this confrontation again. They may just slip back into, the chances are more likely than not that they'll slip back into complacency and comforted. They'll be comforted by every other non-vegan around them, and they'll never feel the moral obligation to change. So that's even more of a reason for us to make sure we give them a clear message. And at the end of the day, there's so many things I want to cover here, but at the end of the day, I don't see how it's a convincing argument to suggest that it makes it easier for my work when most of the people we talk to who say they're doing something, I mean, vegetarian is the classic reducitarian stance. It's not a justice position. It has nothing to do with ethics, even though some people think they're doing it for animals. But the creation of the vegetarian of that position, if you want to call it that, is literally done in a misguided fashion. It wasn't done to end an injustice. Vegetarian is a diet, and it reduces one form of animal exploitation from your diet. So it's the classic reducitarian stance, and vegetarians have existed long before vegans, and vegetarians have been allied with vegans even in the vegan movement. A lot of vegans have allied themselves with vegetarians. So in a lot of ways, the vegetarian position has been made credible. It's been validated by many vegans. It's definitely the more dominant class, let's say, within the world. Like, we have more vegetarians than we do vegans, apparently, from the stats I've seen, and from the amount of people I talk to on the streets, this seems to be true. So how is it making it easier for us? All these vegetarians should be going vegans in droves. But I don't see that happening. I see them being very pompous when we talk to them. They turn their nose up, and they feel like, who are you to tell me any different? I have been vegetarian longer than you've been vegan, so why should I change? This is usually the attitude we get.
Tobias, just before you respond, I just want to clarify something. Paul, you referred a couple of times to justice and that this being veganism being about justice. Just so we're not talking past anybody who might be coming across this video as, you know, maybe not even vegan, could you briefly explain why it's a justice issue?
Yeah. Sure. So I don't see veganism as a reduction of suffering movement. I actually think that misses the point completely. And veganism is essentially an abolitionist stance. It's inherently an abolitionist stance. So veganism is the abolition of human supremacy, and that's why I'm saying it makes it even harder to reverse that psychosis that people have. You know, a lot of people are walking around thinking we're so important, we're so special, that we're not even animals. A lot of people think we're not even animals. That's how important and special we think we are. Then they also think that other animals are not even victims. Like, they're victimized to such a degree that they're not even considered victims. This is a problem with the way people view animals. And human supremacism is that program. That's the operating system, essentially. And so in order to dismantle human supremacy, I don't think that like promoting a reduction of suffering is going to address that. I think that the definition of veganism touches on the fact that this is a justice movement very clearly. It's the ethical principle that humans should live without exploiting other animals. And that the word should, touches on the fact that this is something that you have to reject, that this is an injustice. When there's a should involved, that means that there's a good and a bad involved. And the should implies you should be good. You should do the good thing. So in essence, this is a justice movement. And yeah, that's why I think a lot of people were upset with the position that you seem to hold, which is that it's okay to promote less exploitation, less supremacism.
Yeah, well, thanks, Paul, for the input. There's so much to react to. I don't really know where to start, but so maybe for one thing is that I agree that that's where we need to get this anti-speciesist, anti-human supremacy ethos or whatever you want to call it. That will be the end point, where people know that animals are not there for us to abuse and where we don't abuse them, etc., etc. I just don't think that necessarily the fastest way to get there is to be necessarily always emphasizing that and to go so directly at that. I think that our world, our system is just too entrenched in the use of animals for people to get that. I mean, it's very hard for people to see certain things as long as they're like really ingrained in it, as long as they're profiting from it, as long as they're like having some really big advantages of it. Then there is motivated reasoning. Then people will try to find a way to not believe what you are saying. And so my strategy is to take away that dependence or perceived dependence on animal abuse, right? So I think that the moral revolution will come a lot easier after we've set certain things in place. And that is, among other things, a lot of alternatives, changes of norms, changes of maybe some laws. So telling people like this is an injustice and you can't participate in it, I'm sure it will work for some people. I'm sure it doesn't work for most people or for many other people.
What makes you so sure of that, though? Because you aren't out on the streets doing the cubes like we are doing them, right? I know that you've attended some cubes, but well, I'm not sure how many actually. How many cubes have you actually attended?
Oh, just a couple. But I've done street activism before you existed. Different ways. So I've talked to many people on streets before I got into more institutional activism. So I would say that.
Okay, so based on your activism on the streets, you're not seeing those results, but are you open to being wrong about that?
I am open,
because
just let me,
we are.
Yeah. So it's not just based on my own activism, it's also based on what I'm reading from what people are doing with certain messaging. It's based on what I'm hearing also a lot of people saying actually from anonymous groups, like I read now and then about people who are in a group or left a group or started another group or whatever, and I hear I hear people saying it works. I hear people saying, "Oh, it doesn't work. We're doing something else. We're doing our own thing, etc." But I mean, I don't want to like. I think it's really maybe because I don't want to like just like the worst thing for the animals here from this debate is that we each just stay entrenched in our own views, and I'm open to being wrong.
No, but it's okay to debate ideas,
Yeah, sure,
right? That's
sure,
what we're doing.
sure. Let me just say that like I really think that I'm not against what you're doing at all. I think it's a necessary thing. I think that that the idea of like trying to pre-select people, the ones you can talk to, the ones you can't talk to, by the ones by who arrives at you, who comes to you, is a smart thing, and that can work. I think that there's a lot of good things. I think you create community. I think I like the emphasis on activism. So there's a lot of good things that I see. I just think that it's not the only thing. It's not a theory of change that can explain how we get from here to the end. I don't know how you want to do that by convincing people, vegans, one by one, until we have enough of them. I don't see that happening. So we need, apart from what you're doing, which is great work, we need other things that create system change in which people can change easier. I see so many people making these claims about like with other social justice issues, we wouldn't tolerate this incrementalist reductionist stance. But it takes like just 1 minute. I mean, ask ChatGPT or whatever about incremental tactics and approaches that the other social justice movements took. I mean, in every case, there's been anti-slavery, feminism, whatever. There's people have been fighting these fights with incremental changes and incremental asks. And I'm sure there were also people who didn't, who had like an absolutist ask. But I mean, it's very clearly shows at least that we are and we have used incremental approaches in these other social justice movements. We can ask people, or we could back in the day, people did ask, like, let's treat slaves better, let's do less of it, I mean, child labor is wrong, but I mean, let's cut the hours, let's change the circumstances. In all cases, we have done that. So I don't understand why in this case, we shouldn't be strategic, or we shouldn't be looking at what works and be pragmatic. That would be my stance.
Okay. Yeah. I think that it's bad faith to use the term strategic to suggest that we're not being strategic currently. Because if you see the work we're doing, especially these last campaigns we just did, the word that comes to mind is strategic. So I think that the strategy that we are implementing is the most effective that we have right now. I think that the case that you're making, that we should look at other justice movements and how they've succeeded, I think that you've also made the case to couple that. You've also made the case that, you know, this injustice is more intertwined and entrenched in culture and in society than any other. And so we have to maybe take a different approach with regards to this as a result. I think that makes the case for why we need a direct, truthful, and absolutist position. It makes the case that we need that even more, I think, because, like I said, we may only have 5 minutes with people. It may be the only time they actually encounter a vegan message, and we're going to squander that opportunity by talking about Meatless Mondays. That seems absurd to me. I think that we should use the opportunity wisely and get the correct message across. And if those people who are open to doing Meatless Mondays want to do Meatless Mondays as a result of our position that they should be vegan and they should actually speak up for the animals and anything else is morally unjustifiable, then guess what? They will actually do that because, you know, you ask for veganism and vegan activism, and if they're not open to that and they are open to reducing, that's what they'll do on their own accord. Everybody has to hold themselves accountable at the end of the day. But yeah, and I also just think like this looking at other justice movements is not necessarily effective because humans have gotten a lot of things wrong. And so what they did for the civil rights movement and what they did for other movements may have been the case for that movement, but that doesn't mean it was the best thing in order to address that issue. It could have been addressed better, So
I agree with that.
I think that we're figuring things out with regards to the vegan movement. And I think that the formula was actually largely figured out by Gary Yourofsky in terms of how we should talk to people. And then you have to, on top of all of his work and all of the success he's had with his work, I think he's the most influential vegan activist we have on the planet as a solo activist. I think his words have convinced more people to be vegan than any others. And then you have to put on top of that everything that AB has done with all the work that we have done around the world and all of my work personally. I've done over 1,000 cubes. And these campaigns that we're doing really push the envelope with regards to how we work as an organization and on the individual level, how sharp we are and how effective we are. We actually do. I know that you're a man of data, so we actually do have data to show for the work. And you may, at the end of all this, if I quote you all of these stats, you may say it's anecdotal. You may say Gary Yourofsky's work is anecdotal. But I think that these anecdotes are extremely important to look at because you've said some things already on this recording so far that sound like you're saying that it's not as effective to focus on what we're doing. You're saying that by giving people a clear, direct message, we'll not get as many people as a softer, reduce, meatless Mondays kind of message. I don't understand how you can come off as confident saying that, because for 2 or 3 years, and David, you'll know this because you were a part of AV when this was the case, we had an open source outreach program. Essentially, people could just show up to Cubes and kind of just say whatever they wanted and get away with it. And so if you think that people were showing up to Cubes and delivering a clear, hardcore, direct, truthful message, that's not the case, because let's face it, what I've learned in the last 2 years, especially the last 2 years of running AV, is that people really need guidance and leadership and structure. They need protocols to follow in order to be able to do that. Not everybody is cut from the same cloth. Not everybody is able. Not everybody is capable, I meant to say, of actually being this kind of activist. To be effective at being truthful, and you referred to me speaking eloquently earlier, and that's something that not everybody is able to do, actually, with their words, to command attention, to control the conversation, to hold people accountable in the face of, social comfort, which we're social creatures, so we are attracted to social comfort. And so in the face of that, to be able to actually tell someone, no, you're actually a hypocrite, and I'm not going to let you off the hook until you actually do the right thing. That's not something that people like just show up to Cubes and do. They need like training on this. And so I would argue that people who have complained to you about the ineffectiveness of the approach at AV Cubes are either incapable of actually doing the approach or just haven't done it for whatever reason. And so what they were doing was just showing up at Cubes and just saying whatever and doing some kind of lackluster version of the outreach protocol that we actually have. And in fairness, in 2023, so it's only been 2 years now, was when we actually implemented the workshop. David, you attended the workshop that I did at One Damn Week, which was in 2023. That was the first time we actually presented a flowchart on how you should actually guide a conversation from beginning to end. Before that, nobody had actual steps to follow. And what I learned was that was incredibly valuable to activists, and it actually shaped. And it's been obvious that this has changed the way things are done in AV, because it's shaped the outreach conversations on the individual level as teams. People are now running their own workshops. People are now understanding exactly how to do this. So I would say that if you haven't attended a cube lately, and especially not one of these campaigns that I'm lead organizing with all of the best organizers and the best activists from all over the world in the AB network, all unifying in one city, then you don't really know what we're doing as an organization. Because these campaigns that we're doing, like one damn month, and this year we did one DOM month, and then one damn ode. So it was essentially more than 5 weeks of consecutive street work on a daily basis. It's like an outreach boot camp. We're swimming through human psychology on a daily basis. We're figuring out what works, what doesn't work. We're understanding what makes people tick, what actually gets people to commit, what feels genuine, what doesn't. You know, we are literally figuring this out as we go, and we just had the experience of working with Gary on the ground as well. So we were able to pull from his wisdom and to figure out if what we're figuring out makes sense, you know, if this is the right direction that we're going in or not.
Yeah, again, there's a lot. So to some extent, I feel we're a bit talking next to each other in the sense that, like, I mean, I'm not, whenever I see an AV in somewhere, I'm happy that they're there. I applaud them. I'm really thinking this is part of the solution. At the same time, like I said before, I'm repeating myself, it's not enough. We need something more than that. We need systemic change, and I don't think that systemic change is going to come from this one-by-one conversion, no matter how many people or cubes you have. But that idea of like,
Well,
okay, we're gonna.
Can I just clarify what you mean by systemic change? Do you mean laws being changed? Because AV is not against
Yes,
that.
I mean, it will be lobbying, it will be legal change, it will be a change in the institutions, in the offerings of the institutions, of all restaurants, of cafeterias. It will be norm changing. There's so many things that can and should be achieved, and that will not be achieved only by cubes. I mean, I think I'm fine with you saying that you think that your outreach is the best we have, but I would assume that you don't think it's the only thing we should do.
No, but this is not what we're discussing. We're discussing about how we should communicate. I mean, at least I thought we were discussing how we should communicate the vegan message to people. So I'm not talking about like programs at some school to change the cafeteria menu to whatever. Yeah. This is not what I'm talking about, and I've never once opposed any of that.
Yeah. So
I'm saying that when it comes to doing outreach. Yeah, go ahead.
When I'm talking about reduction, I'm mainly talk about reduction in terms of institutional messaging, not so much one by one. I'm perfectly fine if you want to do one by one and have that very clear message. However, since you say that you will only get to a certain amount of people, I would say like, okay, there's other people that can be got to in other ways. And I would say like, why not try that? You say that like, yeah, if people are not open, they're not open. I don't think that's correct. I think they're not open to a certain message, but they might be open to other things. And if you only see openness to going vegan and going vegan as a success, then I can understand you. But I see taking steps towards going vegan also as successes, because I mean we know that people generally proceed in phases and not overnight. So a reducer does, I mean, according to research, does have a bigger chance to become a vegetarian or a vegan and whatever. So if we can get people to reduce, that is a good step for more. And I mean, there's so many people also, for instance, that I meet in talks, etc., that have started for health reasons. And I believe you got into that as well for health reasons at some point, right? You studied medicine or whatever. So people are open and interested in different things. And I would say, like, if I imagine myself as the pig in the crate and I was looking at activists, I would want the activists I would, as the pig, I wouldn't care if the activist talks about justice. I would care about whatever gets me out of the crate. And that could be other messaging, and it could be slower, it could be less direct than what you're doing, but as long as it moves the needle. So I think that with AV outreach, I mean, you focus on the animals only, but you might miss, and I'm not saying you should do that, but let other people do that, right? Let other people then talk at least about the environment and the health, and don't say that that's like, I don't know what you would say of it, or about reduction.
What
that
do you
it's-
mean by let? So, sorry, Tobias. What do you mean by let other people do that? You mean in other organizations?
Yeah, organizations and
Well, I'm not.
um,
Okay, but I'm not arrogant enough to believe that I actually have control over other organizations and what they do. I don't get to tell them what they do.
I mean
They
the
do whatever they want to do, and
yeah.
I've never worked against a single organization, or So I don't know why you would even say that to me. I'm just focused on doing what we do at AV, and I think that the outreach protocol that we have is the most effective at getting the individual consumer to stop demanding animal exploitation and to stop being a human supremacist.
Yeah.
So, just because I say that that's the most effective way of doing it doesn't mean I'm saying that I don't want other organizations to exist.
Yeah, I mean that's good to hear, and I didn't say that you want other organizations to not exist, but I would say that like, and maybe I'm confusing you with David's audience from the previous interviews that we did, but I see so many people criticizing these other so-called non-abolitionist approaches or incremental approaches, and criticizing them in an actually mean way often, etc. And I don't know why that is necessary. Why we can't see that these things do need to coexist. And I think the problem lies with you and others maybe seeing this thing as like, yeah, if we don't talk about the justice or the injustice, then we're not doing the animals a service, and that I don't believe.
Tobias,
so I don't think, yeah.
Sorry, yeah, just quickly, I wanted to kind of try and bring us on back onto a track, because there was something that Paul said I was curious to hear you expand on. He said when we were comparing to other injustices, because we're back onto justice now, and Paul had said, you said that obviously this one is the most entrenched one ever, so it needs to be dealt with in a different way from Paul's perspective, and that's why he goes the way he goes. But I want to actually look into another injustice that was arguably as entrenched, if not more entrenched, than how we treat animals, and that was actually human slavery. I think humans, maybe just after animals, is the first currency. Like, it was very, very similar time periods where animals and humans were currency, depending on obviously your ethnicity or in recent years your surname. Even you were born into slavery, right? Or enslaved by another tribe or whatever. And so Tobias, I mean, you write about this and how the West started to fight back against that, and actually the West went to other countries and tried to free slaves in other countries even, and that became like a real moral thing. And you've written about how we got there through incremental change. It didn't just happen overnight. It actually took a long time of incremental change for people to have this sort of moral revolution, and how that, if we have to do that for humans, the idea that we don't have to do that for animals seems a little naive, right? So could you get into that as a discussion? I'd love to hear what Paul's take on that is as well, and that seems like a kind of juicier way for us to go, because I don't think you're not criticizing AV, so I don't know if that's a useful thing for us to keep discussing, so you're actually supportive of AV.
Yeah, so I mean, comparing or relating to these other causes, and particularly slavery, I mean, I'm mainly making the point that also in the case of slavery, we have been incremental. But Paul has a good point, saying that we don't necessarily know that it was the best way to get us where we are. Like, it's not because there was incremental change, and there was a lot of incremental change in the past, that was the fastest way. So it doesn't really prove anything, but it only shows that people have done it, and that we don't need to be afraid or whatever of I don't know, like being unjust or betraying anybody, or not taking a cause seriously enough, by not being absolutist about it, by not saying like every time and everywhere this is wrong and it needs to stop now. I mean, that's not what abolitionists did. That's not what feminists did. That's not what, I mean, parts of these movements did. They all did incremental activism. And for instance, the anti-slavery activists, the abolitionists, they were talking for a long time, for decades, they were talking about the abolishment of the slave trade, not about the abolishment of the slave institution. They were talking about other arguments. They used arguments like the economy, that slavery was actually bad for the economy. They used arguments like slavery is bad for, or transatlantic slave trade is bad for the British sailors, for the white sailors, for their health. There's so many who are dying. So it's not wrong, I think, to use other arguments. And I think that sometimes I say that sometimes the best, and you might very much disagree with this, Paul, but sometimes I think the best thing to do for animals is not to talk about them. That might sound contradictory, but if we know that people will get triggered or will be they will show reactance to something, and reactance is like a really important thing. Like that's something I'm afraid of, actually, that with many people, when you use certain tactics like guilt, etc., they actually do get reactive, and they are going to look for defending their position, and sometimes even start eating more meat. So this pragmatism and this flexibility of approaches is something that I would recommend, but at the same time, I'm also, like I said, not against using that very direct approach.
I think there just seems to be a misunderstanding of the work that we do, because we have done your approach. I've done it. I did it many times. We did it. Like I said, people were showing up to Cubes for years just saying whatever they wanted to say, and most people are not very strong in their outreach. So they ended up saying eating less meat. They ended up saying things that were vegetarian messages, that were welfarist messages. They were avoiding making people feel guilty. They were focusing on being liked as a priority. They were pandering, they were doing all these things. So yes, I did come from a position of being interested in my health, and I ended up plant-based as a result of that before I was vegan. So that's exactly why I am confident about my position currently. This is exactly like why I know that I didn't need to go through the plant-based diet to get to veganism. I didn't need to reduce in order to understand that I'm disrespecting animals and that I have no right to do that. If I had stumbled across Gary Yourofsky's speech before I was plant-based, I would have become vegan instantly.
I'm not sure if you could.
I wish that had happened. No, we don't know that. But the fact that I started on a plant-based diet is, I feel like you were making the case that worked for me, so it must work for other people. But actually, the opposite is true in my case, because I know for a fact that I was the kind of person that was seeking truth. So yeah, we will never know because it didn't happen that way. But I know that I was on a path, and that if someone had given me this truth, I may have reduced a little bit before actually committing, but it would have happened a lot sooner that I would have become vegan and actually spoke up for the victims. That's something that, at least I'm in my heart, I know that that's true. Mm-hmm. But I also, like I said, we've already tried your approach on thousands, countless people on the streets. So, while you're saying that you support AV and that you're not trying to talk badly about our approach, I also hear you saying things like, yes, but making people feel guilty doesn't work. But actually, we're proving that that's the only thing that works the best.
I'm not saying it doesn't work. It works on some people. There's one research by one study by Bryant Research that distinguishes very clearly the meat conscious people and the people who what they call the shame resistors. And the first group, and I think you're trying to identify that first group, the people who are ready, the people who show some openness. With them, the guilt can work. And in as far as you talk to those people with that message, I think it's all good. I'm not against guilting, but I'm just afraid of using guilt when you do it with people who are not open to it and where it's not conducive to change, and they will show reactance and it will get worse for them. You see?
Okay, and this is based on the idea that if we ask them to quit animal exploitation, to reject it completely, that this is not going to be as effective as asking them to reduce over time.
Yeah, I mean,
Is that
this
correct?
particular study is about, when people are told that they are complicit in animal suffering and animal exploitation, that they will see a need to justify what they're doing, and they will get more entrenched in what they're doing rather than the opposite.
Yeah, I think that people will do that from our experience regardless, if you ask them to reduce. And I think that, I'm not sure, I haven't seen the actual studies that you're referring to, and I'm not in academia.
I'm not either.
So I'm not going to try and act like you're not. Okay, well, I'm not going to try and act like I know how to read scientific studies, but I feel like a lot of these things are based on surveys and questionnaires, people that are answering, like, who cares what non-vegans say? Yes, I'm going to reduce. Does that mean they actually reduced? Or if they said, yes, I agree that a softer approach is more effective than a more hardcore approach, who cares what they have to say? Non-vegans are constantly trying to tell vegans how to do activism. Vegan activists who have done this for any significant amount of time know not to take their advice. They just know that this is not valuable and credible advice. So I just don't know why we would base studies on those kinds of things if that's what they're based on. And I think people just pay lip service a lot of the time and say, yes, I am against factory farming. Okay, then why do you continue to eat animals that are factory farmed? Like, it just makes no sense. People are responsible for factory farming while saying they're against it in almost all cases when they say that.
Mm-hmm.
So I just don't care what they say. I care about people's actions, which is, I thought, how we all judged other people, not based on their words, especially when their words contradict the very actions they're talking about. So, yeah, I mean,
So
I also want to, I shared a study with David just now, since I know that this is the language you speak. I mean, I know you're not in academia, you've just clarified that, but you do refer to studies a lot. There is one study I'd like to pull up, and this was, you just said 30 seconds on ChatGPT. You had said that earlier. Well, this only took 30 seconds on ChatGPT to pull up as well. And, this is my problem with studies as well, is that I could pull up things, you could pull up things, we can go back and forth, but we're out here in the real world actually doing the work on the ground. I think that we're proving what the most effective outreach approach is. But this study shows that people... David, do you want to read it out, or do you want me to... Because I don't actually have the study in front of me. I just sent it to you because I'm using my phone as a mic.
I can read this.
Do you want to read it out?
So it's... we'll have to, I'll tell you what, I'll read it out and then I'll check if ChatGPT actually accurately, because sometimes it gets confused. But all right, gradual versus abrupt smoke and cessation. So it's about smoking. It was a randomized control trial of 700 adult smokers in England who all planned to quit. They all received counseling and nicotine replacement therapy. They were randomly assigned to either quit right now, abruptly, keep smoking as usual, and then just quit on a certain date, or they were advised to do it gradually, reduced by 75% over 2 weeks, and then quit. And they were doing it to see which one would work better. They said the results were the abrupt group had a higher abstinence than the gradual group. So the ones who just stopped, they stuck to it better. And after 4 weeks, after 6 months, the abrupt quitting group, the ones who just quit immediately, they had significantly higher rates of abstinence, so that they were stopping. They were more likely to stop. And advising people to stop on a completely on a set date, they claim contributed to more lasting behavior change than gradual. Oh shit. So I can go look that and just make sure it's legit while you two talk about it. I'll go and look that up.
Yeah, look, I mean, like I said, Tobias, I don't like arguing from the position of studies when it comes to a justice movement as atrocious. Let me put it like this, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, but just to refresh on what we're talking about here, this is unlike the civil rights movement, unlike any of the other justice movements that have ever existed, because of the fact that we talked about, that it's so heavily entrenched in society. Like, everybody's responsible for this, except for the small percentage of vegans, right? But then the other fact is that this atrocity is so great in scale. We've never had more victims that have been victimized to a single injustice ever. Like, nothing even comes close. You know, some people refer to the Jewish Holocaust as a comparison to the animal Holocaust. But the reality is that the animal Holocaust, like, when you compare the numbers, it's actually a mockery of how large the injustice is. Like, we're talking about 3 trillion victims per year. I don't know of any other injustice in the world that has even come close to 1 billion, let alone 3,000 billion in 1 year. So in the history of humankind, it's like these numbers are so staggeringly large that I think we absolutely need to be careful to not say, well, this worked for this other movement, so we should do the same thing with this.
Paul,
That
just
was not
to
my
The
argument.
issue's too great.
That was not
We
my
need-
argument.
okay.
Oh, okay.
Just to intervene 1 second on that study before.
Well, I felt like what
Okay.
David was saying was that I thought David said it was naive to extrapolate that we shouldn't be doing what other
What I would
justice
say
movements-
with this argument is, like, at least we can see, that's the very least we can say, that other movements have done this too. But I agree with you, it doesn't guarantee that this was the best track towards success. That's impossible to prove, unfortunately.
Plus, we still have slavery, like you said.
Right, yeah, but it's just not.
We still have slavery
But
in
we
the
have,
world.
yeah. My point was that
yeah.
we only have one example of something even remotely close to this when we look at human slavery, something that's been around since like the dawn of civilization, and it was actively an active injustice against sentient beings, but actually humans, which makes it even more like, wow, can you even believe that happened? Like, that's absolutely wild. And even with that movement, they only succeeded through incremental change. That was kind of the point, that it's like, if you're going to need incremental change to fix that problem, the idea that we won't need it to fix this problem could be naive, but it's not a guarantee. It's just, that was kind of my premise to put forward to have you guys discuss. Before I let you go on to the next point, sorry, that study, just one thing I wanted to point out about that study that is important. They only monitored them up to 6 months. And so what we don't know, we only know that it worked up to 6 months, but we don't know what happened after 2, 5, or 10 years. And now it might turn out that the ones who were gradually reducing continued gradually reducing for 10 years, whereas the ones who abruptly stopped started smoking normally again after 2 years. And this is, that's actually... There is some not very good data on people, vegans, and it's not good because people self-identify as vegans and then they say, I quit veganism, so it's not reliable. But there is some indication that this does happen, that people who like reduce tend to just reduce forever, like or for a very long time. But some people who go, right, that's it, I'm vegan, some of them, they see it as all or nothing, and so they just flip the switch when they decide, oh, actually no longer. But they usually weren't as connected to the animal issues. That sort of supports your position as well, Paul. It's sort of in between both of your positions, the kind of data on that, as far as I understand. But anyway, that was just to bring some nuance to that study anyway, in that it's interesting, but unless it gives us 10 years, we don't actually know if it was like a long-lasting thing. Or maybe they all just went back to smoking, you know what I mean? It could be that none of it worked, right? Anyway.
But this is why I said, like, I'm showing you this study,
yeah,
but I don't like arguing
for
these
sure,
studies.
for sure.
I think it's a poor way to argue this.
It's just because we referenced it. I just felt a responsibility to make sure we dealt with it before we kept going on. That's all. I wanted to just make sure it was like nuanced.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you did, because I didn't necessarily think it was.
Can I say something about
all-proof argument?
Of course you can. This is a discussion between you guys. I'll shut up again for another 10 minutes. Go for it.
Yeah, just a bit on the meta level about studies. I mean, we can prove a lot or disprove a lot with studies. I don't want to disvalidate your experience on the street. It's important too. I just don't want to say that, like, I don't agree that, like, oh, who cares what meat eaters say? They're the audience that we want to reach. We should care about them. We should care what they say. They might not say always the truth, but there are some ways to get at the truth with experiments, etc. So we can sort of invent ways to get at what they think and what they feel about these things. So let's just not throw the baby out with the bathwater. And there is also some things that are more solidly proven than others. I mean, the research on guilt and shame seems pretty consistent, for instance. Anyway, that's just on scientific research. I just want to come back to that thing about slavery. So I obviously agree with you that this is the biggest horror and moral crisis of our time and ever, and it's huge in scope. And maybe this can make my point clear a little bit. I think that, so this is horrible. Many people agree it's horrible, especially factory farming. And still there's no big groups of people taking to the streets to protest this. And I think one of the reasons for this is that almost everybody is complicit. And are you
Hang on a second. Sorry, Tobias, are you talking about... Yes. Did you just say that no one's taken to the streets to protest factory farming?
Not massively, in droves, in the millions. I mean, like climate change, we never had a march that comes even close to the size of a climate change march for animal rights, against animal suffering, right? And that is because people are very complicit in it. And I just want to make the comparison with slavery. Slavery ended with a war between the North and the South. And the North people were much more against slavery. And why was that? Why was there this split between North and South? It was
in America you're talking about here, right?
Yeah, in America. Yeah. It was very simply because the climate in the South is a lot hotter, and they could do certain crops there like tobacco and rice and sugar and cotton. And these required a lot of labor, and they used slave labor for that. And so, again, this is an example of where you stand depends on where you sit. People needed slaves, they were using slaves, and they were therefore were approving of slavery. And in the North, they were much more against slavery, and the North won in the end. So this is just to show that this dependence and this ingrainedness of our use of animal products is prohibitive against our understanding the things that are at stake here. And that just makes it more difficult to reach people. And therefore, I think we can reach people in different ways that are not necessarily only the way that you suggest.
Yeah, I think, again, this is sort of a misrepresentation of my position. My position, just to clarify, is that the most effective approach during outreach interactions is to give them a clear, direct, truthful messages that sits on three principles. One, holding them accountable. Two, putting them in the victim's position. And three, a call to action, that they must change right now. That this isn't just food for thought.
Yeah.
And so I'm saying that's the most effective outreach approach.
I understand that.
Okay, that's my position. I'm not saying that other outreach approaches shouldn't exist at all. I am saying, however, that it makes it harder for our work when you're out there promoting a reducitarian message. I keep coming back to this, but I don't know how you're arriving at this conclusion that we don't have enough reducitarian messages in the movement. The predominant approach in the vegan movement is a reducitarian message, and has been for many, many years now. I just don't know how you're arriving at this conclusion. Can you help me to understand that?
Yeah, I really don't know how we can be sure of that. I would agree that since maybe 10, 15 years, we've done more of that. I would say that the movement, I would call it, has become more pragmatic in that sense. But It's hard to estimate. I would say, animal rights organizations often give a go vegan message, an all or nothing message. Vegetarian vegan organizations less so, like Pro-Veg does not give that message. But then there's the whole, apart from the professional organizations, there's the grassroots and there's all the YouTube and online activists. I see a lot of go vegan messaging there. So I'm not sure. You could be right. I really don't know if we could say that by far reducitarian messaging
All right.
is the majority.
I don't know how you could see anything else that's happening in the movement in terms of organizations. They may be saying go vegan in some things they say, but I would say, okay, here's an indication of the problem that I'm trying to describe to you. On the streets, people who identify as vegan, when they tell us that, we actually now have a clear protocol on how to communicate with those people. One of the first questions we ask them, if not the first question, is, do you know what the original definition of veganism is? And even if people say yes, 99% of the time, and I'm not exaggerating at all, they do not understand what veganism actually is. Okay? They usually say something along the lines of, it means you don't eat meat, dairy, and eggs, and things like that. So they literally think it's a diet. And yeah, they might say it's got something to do with animals. It's out of concern for animals in some way. They may say that, but they don't truly understand the severity and the urgency of this. They think it's okay to not be vegan. They think it's just a personal choice. Most of the people that we talk to that are vegan. So this means that people who have gotten a go vegan message, generally speaking, I don't think have actually been given a vegan message. I think it's very important that we align if we're saying we're both vegans and that we're both interested in the same thing, ending this injustice and creating a world of justice for animals and ending human supremacy. If we're on the same page about that, then we need to be on the same page about the definition of veganism. Because if we have different definitions, then yeah, I can understand why we are having this disagreement, but I think it might be easily resolved by that, or at least significantly improved.
Mm-hmm.
That we're on the same page about what veganism actually means, because that's what we're trying to communicate to non-vegans and to fellow vegans at the end of the day.
I think we both understand we have the same understanding of it. I'm just not so hung up on the definition of veganism and on veganism itself. Like David said at the beginning, it's a road to an end. It's not the end itself. Or you might say it's the end itself. The end for me is the end of animal exploitation and animal suffering. And I think there's like a huge emphasis and focus and almost fetishization of this vegan concept. And it's just not, that concept is not just the only way to get people to where we want. I see people getting so nervous about this has to be so clear. And people say to me that I'm watering down the idea of veganism and all of that. I'm really not very concerned with that thing that so many people are so obsessed with, which is the clarity of the vegan message. The clarity is it's one aspect of the vegan message, but there's also other aspects like the palatability of it, the accessibility of it. And this is not pandering. This is just making sure that people do something. And I think that, again, in as far as you can identify the people who are open to that message, great. I just want to reach the other people as well. And saying that the ones who are not ready are not ready, I think that's kind of lame. We can do a lot better than that. We can really find ways to reach people who, in your view, are not ready for your message, right? We can find people who can take steps for health reasons, for environmental reasons. We can find people who can take steps for no reason at all. And all these steps can lead to other steps. That is, I mean, research is pretty clear that like a lot of the times, and to go back to that tobacco example might be true, I don't know, but we're talking about physical addiction there, which is still a different thing than what we are talking about here. But research is pretty clear that change happens very often in steps from one to the next. And you could say that like, okay, I don't appreciate this one step. You don't get a handshake from me when you're just going to do one thing. I'm just seeing it differently, and I'm seeing like, okay, all these people are moving. And when you say that I make your work more difficult, again, it could be true, but again, that's hard to prove, because what we're doing with what vegetarian asks is, again, increasing supply and demand. And you can reach people much easier if they have the impression that there's enough alternatives around. You know, every one of us may think that we got in there for moral reasons alone, but of course, how easily we got in there is determined to a large extent by our perception of how difficult it is in practice. I'll let you talk.
Well, I mean, I disagree. You know, I generally eat fruit. So I never needed meat replacements and cheese replacements and egg replacements. You know, this kind of shit actually bothers me, that we focus so much on alternatives. I literally think that people are ready to eat fruits and vegetables and eat basic plant-based foods, which is healthier for you anyway, if they understand the moral obligation to do so. Like, I think that there's this kind of air of like, oh, people are like not going to get it, so we have to say it like this to them. Like, I think we can speak to people's intelligence, and we can speak to their character and assume they can understand that they should change right now. And yeah, and again, I'm not saying that like plant-based organizations out there, nutritional activists, if you want to call them that, or environmental activists who are promoting a plant-based message shouldn't be doing that. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that people like you, who identify as a vegan activist, you said you've been vegan activist for 25 years now, you should be promoting a clear vegan message, in my opinion. And it's okay for us to criticize each other's ideas, right? This doesn't mean I'm being mean to you by saying this, right? I think that you should be promoting a clear vegan message, because you know the truth. You know what people should be doing. These plant-based groups trying to get people to eat more lentils, they don't care about anything other than human rights.
So
human health is a human right.
I would promote a clear vegan message in the cases where I think that's the most effective thing I can do for animals. That is not always the case. So I'm not hooked up on that.
Yes, but again, this is why I started off with this conversation. I clearly asked the question, are you saying that it's more effective for you to promote what you're doing?
In some cases, not
during
always.
Outreach interactions.
I mean, I might speak, let's say...
What do you think is more effective? What is, because I'm married to what is most effective.
Me too.
And this isn't because I'm fetishizing the definition of veganism. This is because I'm addicted, I'm obsessed with justice for the animals, because they're the most victimized on the planet. I want that to happen more than anything else that I want in my life. So my question to you is, in terms of outreach interactions with others, what do you think the most effective approach is?
I think there's no one most effective approach. I think that being flexible, trying to see what can get the person to move, is what's important. And that is not always, I mean, you say yourself, I mean, I don't understand, you say yourself that you will only get a certain amount of people with that message. So either you get them or you don't get them, and if you can't get them with that message, you give up on them. That's just not my approach. I think that...
No, I'm saying if they're not listening and they're not willing to change, that changing the message to, well, just reduce then. Will you at least cut out meat 3 times a week? Even if they say yes to that, you've now given them like that not only seems ineffective to me, but it seems counterproductive.
So would you agree that going vegan is easier today than it was 20 years ago because of all the options that we have?
Yeah, absolutely. But I don't think that I don't think we necessarily needed it
Well,
to achieve the goal.
yeah, don't know what to say. I mean, I think that we do. I think that like if the chicken nugget is one of the most eaten products, consumed products in the world, it's good to make an alternative to the chicken nugget, and rather than...
Yeah, I'm not opposed to that. I've never once protested against these plant-based alternatives.
But you're saying it's not necessary.
I'm just saying I don't see... I do see that perspective. I just don't see that it's... there's also downsides to this. There's also downsides to creating vegan chicken nuggets, which is that when people switch to vegan chicken nuggets and they think they're going to be super healthy because all of these plant-based messages say you're going to be much healthier, and they still experience cholesterol issues, and they still experience heart issues and weight issues and cancer issues, that this ends up backfiring. And then when they do get a clear vegan message, they're going to be, oh, I tried it. I already tried it. It didn't work for me. It didn't work for my health. Mm-hmm. And we get that a lot, by the way. We get that too many times.
There's definitely disadvantages to the chicken nugget, and what you say about health, that's true. I think that just the advantages, the benefits are bigger than the downsides, because if you don't have them and you have to tell people like, look, now switch to a diet of fruits and vegetables and chickpeas and whatever and beans, I think it's gonna go slower again. And this is just, I mean, this is what I call being realistic, basically.
I don't tell people how to eat, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, just saying.
I just want to clarify that. I don't even talk about how to be vegan. Yeah. Like, if you see me talking about that during my outreach interactions, that's like 5% of the interaction.
Yeah, sure. Just saying that, like, it will be easier with the chicken nugget, and the chicken nugget is there and can be consumed by people because a lot of people are reducing. Well,
Tobias, let's do one thing. Give us. Sorry, man. I just want to try and like get into the bottom of this. Give me 3 examples. Give me one example where what Paul's saying, his strategy, you think it will work. Give me another example where you think a reduction strategy will work, and then give me a third example where you think that actually, potentially, as a thought experiment, however you want to put it, that actually using or consuming something non-vegan would work in all 3 cases where it benefits animals in the long run, like as in like they all lead us to a better world for animals. Maybe that'll help to kind of get to the bottom of what you're saying.
Yeah. So like I said, I think Paul's approach works with the people that are ready for it. With the people that it works for, it will work. So you have to have people who are already open, who already feel a sense of guilt. You can talk to them about I think the accountability thing and the fact that you say, like, look, this is maybe the only moment that somebody's going to help hold you accountable. I think that's quite good. I think that can definitely work. I'm just saying, in the cases where it doesn't work, and there's a lot of them, other people can use something else. Maybe you can use something else. I don't know.
So give an example of that. Like in that case where it won't work, like create a character or a person and a situation where it won't work, and then where you would prefer to.
I mean, I think my neighbor, who is like a 65-year-old man on a farm country here, the countryside, I would feel more convinced that telling him to try veganuary, for instance, would work better than you go vegan here and now because it's a moral obligation, etc. So that is one example of that.
Because he's like a countryside guy, not in the city, not exposed to these sorts of like, could say like modern messages and things like.
The sense I got
ideals
about it is that he's totally not ready. So if he's not ready, why should I use the approach that Paul says himself is an approach only for people who are ready? Should I then not talk to him because I think he's not ready for that message? Should I just ignore? Should I not try to influence him?
And then
I don't think so.
And then the third one, that the idea, like this is probably, again, your most controversial thing that we had in my interviews with you, that you think there are some cases where actually using or consuming something technically not vegan would be better in the long run. So could you give us an example of what situation would you be in where it could be better to actually, do that?
I mean, these are hypotheticals just to tease out what people find most important, sticking to veganism very strictly, or something else which could be results. And I don't want to say that people who always stick to veganism are not results focused, but I mean, for instance, it could be an undercover investigator. I've heard these stories, undercover investigator being in a slaughterhouse or a factory farming for a couple of weeks, and to like not be suspicious, eat meat along with their factory farming slaughter colleagues.
They have to kill animals as well.
Or they may even have to kill animals. So this is this is more consequentialist. This is saying like, in this case, the end justifies the means, and it's terrible. I'm sure they're traumatized, but it's an example of where you would cross the line, or where you would.
Sorry to keep interrupting. I'm just trying to really get to the bottom of it. Could you give us an example, though? What Paul focuses on outreach, right? Not undercover investigation. Yeah. So what about in like an example of talking to somebody, like where you think that outside of an investigation, like just where you're trying to convince somebody to make changes? Yeah. In what situation can you think of a situation there where you think it would be better to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see a problem with talking about the environment if I see that a person is interested in the environment. And I would not reason the way Paul does. Paul would say, I think, well, it's not about the environment, it's about the animals. We have to make this very clear. My tactic or my reasoning or belief system would be that, like, okay, they move in that direction for the environment, they move in that direction for health, and then they will be much more open to maybe the next time they see an anonymous person for the moral reasons. So it's priming people for the moral reasons by telling them other things if they're not open straight away for the moral reasons.
Okay, one more thing I'll just add on, because there's something you told me actually privately that I want to put out there, as well as like sort of like a better example of the third example that you might have forgotten about now. But we talked about this example of, say you were at a table full of high stakes, very, very wealthy people who are willing to fund, let's say they're willing to fund AV, like, or something similar, like they're willing to put a lot of money in, but they're not vegans yet. But they're very interested in their animal, they're on that road. And say the restaurant is serving truffle sauce pasta, right? But you don't know whether the truffles were obtained through dogs that were specifically bred to find truffles, or pigs, which is quite common. But they can be obtained completely vegan, by the way. But you don't know. There's no way to find out. The restaurant doesn't know. Nobody knows. In front of all these people, Tobias would entertain the idea that it's maybe better just to eat the truffle pasta to show them all that actually, this is not about being dogmatic, and actually, we can get along here and you can fund a really effective movement. All we care about is what works. We're not about just rules for the sake of rules. Or alternatively, you could say, no, because I don't know, I'm not going to eat it. And then you kind of cause like a bit of like a weird situation at the table with all these influential people that could potentially save millions of animals by funding your movement. So that's kind of like three examples of different outreach, sort of, I suppose you could call them outreach tactics. Does that help guide the conversation a bit more, Paul? Because I know you've been kind of trying to find out where he thinks it's more effective or less effective, and
Yeah, but it's helpful to a degree for you to explain that a bit further, but most of what was said there was based on imagined circumstances.
No, only the last one, I would say.
Well, with your neighbor, you said you didn't feel like he was. You said you didn't have the sense that he was open.
Yeah, I mean.
So that means you haven't actually tried to be direct with him. I think that this is the thing, right? With the outreach protocol we have, it is a fantastic assessment of whether they're open or not. We really do. Okay, I'll put it like this. If someone is even slightly open, which means they would be the kind of person, if they're only slightly open, they would be the kind of person that you would argue should be given a softer message, right? Because you have to be somewhat open to be open in order to be open to like reducing, right? So if they're even somewhat open, I'm going to just remind you that my position is that this approach we have is the most effective at completely cracking them open. So if your neighbor is even remotely open, I think our outreach protocol would crack him open. You know, again, this is a very basic message. And even in the case with regards to the other thing that you mentioned with the potential funders, which I can get into in just a moment, but like we have to trust that the message is clear enough, that the animals are enough of a reason for people to understand this. We have to actually embody that. If we carry the idea in our heads that other people just won't get it, they're going to think this is too strict, that this is too crazy, that this is a cult, that whatever, then we're going to project that into conversations. So, like, we have to be extremely responsible for the way we carry ourselves and, in effect, the way we carry the message. So we can be better at the way we communicate. We need to be responsible about that. We can just go into every interaction we have being optimistic and have in our mindset that the person we're talking to will understand this, because it's very easy to understand once it's explained properly, that people don't necessarily want to be oppressors and victimizers, that you're actually giving them a privileged opportunity to upgrade their character in a way that they've never had before. You know, this is the kind of mindset we can have when we go into these interactions, instead of being like, no, they're not going to get it. It's going to be too crazy for them to understand that truffles can sometimes, in fact, most times, be harvested using animal exploitation. I think we can simply explain it to people. You know, it's not hard to explain. The more comfortable I've become about this, the more passionate I've become about this being the most effective approach. And it's not just working for me, it's working for people of all walks, of all sizes, of all shapes, of all, you know, creeds, all over the world. So I know that this isn't just a one size fits all for every person, because you actually have to be capable, you have to be willing to say the difficult things.
So do you have a problem
confronting people is...
Do you have a problem doing something else with these other people, the ones who are not open? Don't you agree that they might not be open for your message and approach, but they might be open for other things, and wouldn't that be a good thing?
I think it's skewing the circumstance in an unnecessarily negative way by saying that. I think that those people who would be open to reducitarian message would be somewhat open, and if they're somewhat open, I'll get them to understand that they should be vegan. And if they still choose to reduce as a result of the conversation, then they'll do that anyway. So I might as well give them a clear vegan message.
Yeah. It's not the approach I would take in that sense. I mean, I think there are very clearly people who are open to different things and interested in different things that you will get with different things. And I see all these things as doors through which we could lead them to animal rights. But
again, Tobias, like I said, we've tried this. We used to have an environmental message and a health message in AV for 3 years. We did this, and we were already the largest vegan street activism organization in the world within 1 year of operating AV.
Yeah.
So for 3 years, we operated in around 1,000 cities around the world. We're easily the most global vegan outreach organization. So to say this, and you're saying it repeatedly, completely overlooks the work we're doing. We have already done this. We've already tried to hook people in with as many different hook points as possible. And this is the result. The result has led us to here, to where we are currently. We learned that that was actually not the most effective way to get people to go vegan. And in fact, we're generating more of these people who self-identify and don't understand veganism and feel like they're already doing enough. They tried it and didn't work for their health. All these things are creating problems for us now. And so I think that what you're saying actually generates more problems than it does solutions. You're saying that it's something that we should do, in like along with what we're doing.
I'm mainly saying that
but actually I
other
think
people can do it, and that like it would be a mistake to say that other people should not try to get to these people with other messages. And I'm fine with you
well,
saying,
I mean, of course I'm going to say that, because I know I'm finding this to be the most effective. So I'm going to tell people you should be doing what we're doing at AB,
yeah. So,
because I think that's the best thing for the movement.
So
but I can't stop other organizations from doing what they're doing, and I'm not trying to protest. I'm not going to ever work against another organization.
Okay, that's very good to hear, and it would be nice if like, yeah, that's a message worth spreading, I think. I'm very open to the fact. I mean, it's basically, I don't know what data or evidence you have, and I'm a bit skeptical, I have to say, about like people saying like, yeah, we'll go vegan now, that they actually do. And I know you will say like, yeah, we can't track that, and I mean that is a problem, I think. But I'm open.
No group can ever track.
Yeah, that. I'm open to. I mean, you could, for instance, like suppose you have a focus on one town with a lot of AV protests, and then you could maybe somehow track the meat consumption in that area in the supermarkets or whatever. But anyway, I'm open to you saying that that it is the most effective way. I'm saying, still keep saying there should be other things around that. I'm very interested to like actually try it once and participate in the cube and just follow the protocol and see.
This is a good idea. I would love for you to join the next campaigns we do in Europe. Mm-hmm. Next year, we're going to do a large campaign. It will easily be the greatest campaign we'll do. Everyone is greater than the one before, but now we're at such a high level with what we're doing. So I invite you to join. It will probably be in Amsterdam. I'll give you, you'll see the details. They'll be posted pretty soon. In the next few months, you'll see us promoting the next big campaign we do next year. And it'll be a boot camp for everybody involved, and you'll get a proper experience of what our outreach approach is like, and you'll get to test it. There was, and again, this is anecdotal, but there was an outreach interaction I had recently, and it was one of my favorites because this was a classic case of, okay, first of all, this guy was an MMA athlete. He had a cauliflower ear. So this guy was a grappler, and he was massive. He was like 3 times my size. He could have snapped me like a breadstick if he wanted to. And I'm talking to him, and his girlfriend was vegan, but had not convinced him on even reducing. He said that he was reducing, but he was actually still stuck in this complacency mindset. He was also trying to say that he would pay more money for to stay away from factory farms. So he would, seek out free-range, small farm, organic products. And he was giving me a lot of excuses, actually, a lot of pushback. And I did not waver at all from the protocol that we have. And it's a 3-part video. It's actually pinned to my reels. You know how on Instagram, on the reel page of your Instagram account, there's 3 pins at the top. You can choose 3 reels. It's a 3-part video series, and they're currently pinned to the top of my Instagram if you want to check them out. Basically, he runs through his excuses. I don't let him off the hook. I continue to hold him accountable. I continue to call him out for lying, for being a hypocrite. And he says himself, when I feel this kind of pressure, when someone tells me I need to do something, it pushes me away. This is what he said. And most vegans in that circumstance would back off. And they would feel like, oh shit, I'm being ineffective. Maybe I should back off. And like you say, we should listen to what non-vegans have to say. Of course we should listen, but what I was trying to say before was that when they say, I am against factory farming, we shouldn't necessarily believe them. doesn't necessarily mean that they are going, like, it's their actions that matters. So yes, we should take into account what they say, but at the end of the day, you have to know that we're swimming through ego, and we're dealing with a lot of bullshit that humans carry through their conditioning. So in order to cut through those layers of conditioning, and there is no greater conditioning than human supremacism, and I do agree with Gary Yourofsky when he said it's the root of all discrimination. But anyway, back to this conversation. This conversation with this MMA athlete, he felt pressure, and he said, I feel like this is pushing me away, actually, right? So instead of backing off, I went even harder. I doubled down. And the result was, actually, I won't tell you what the result was, but it was obviously one of my favorite interactions for a good reason. You should see how it turned out. But then as a follow-up, I got a message from him, because we stayed in contact. I actually wanted to go and train with him. But through conversations, he told me that he hated that conversation. But since that day, he's been vegan. So there it is. I just gave you the result of that conversation. But so, this is why I say we shouldn't necessarily listen to what non-vegans are telling us, right? The truth is the truth. He recognized the truth for what it was. I knew that he had to be held accountable, because the basic way to navigate any injustice is that victimizers should be held accountable, right? I also only held him accountable to the values that he shared with me. He told me he respected animals. So this isn't even about me and my values anymore. I am just making sure that he tells the truth, that he doesn't just say those things, that he actually acts that way. And he ended up being a person with the kind of character that was willing to change, but only after an intense amount of pressure was applied to him.
Yeah.
Because no one had actually done that. Everybody else was like, okay, I guess he's not listening to the go vegan message, so maybe we should back off. And everybody else, his girlfriend, maybe others, were trying to do the softer approach, and it wasn't working.
So, yeah, it's a nice story, and I mean, you can build a whole theory on it, I think, but this may happen a lot in your experience. So I'm not going to contradict it. But here's one thing that I'm a bit cautious about, is that, like, so what you're doing with this approach, where you have pre-selected maybe a person that is open, and you are talking to them, and you're charismatic, and you're well-spoken, and you can convince him. I'm still, given the risks that there are, I mean, I'm not saying, yes, you're right, we don't have to take people every time at their word, but I'm not going to ignore the studies about reactants, etc. either. It would be not prudent to do that. So given those risks, I am a bit afraid that many activists, young people, whatever, see this and take this everywhere without the context of AV, without the protocol, take it online and start talking to people like that. A lot of other people looking at it and also finding this too aggressive, are not comfortable with being called a hypocrite online or whatever, and just are reactive and are further away from our cause and where we want to lead them than before. I think that's a real risk, that your protocol, your approach gets taken out of context, and a lot of people, I see so much crap that people throw at each other, and also in the movement, like people towards each other for not being entirely vegan, all that kind of thing. So yeah, that's something that I would be like really mindful of that issue.
Well, people are doing this approach online. In fact, I would say that I see that happening more than ever before. People are actually just debating people on TikTok, where people just join on a live stream and they just run the outreach protocol on them, and they're finding great success with it. I think that, if the outreach approach is actually followed properly, that it has great success regardless of whether the screens are involved or not.
If your protocol could help people deal better with conversations and discussions online, then that would be a very good thing.
Yeah, it does. It actually does. And I see this. I've been seeing this more than ever before with people who are doing live debates, who are doing even in the comment section, going back and forth with people, running the protocol, and it works a charm.
Mm-hmm.
It really does. I've had some of the most stubborn, hard-headed people showing up to Cube saying, no, this can't be the most effective, criticizing literally everything we do, always asking questions, but coming from a good faith place. And in the end, they all end up with the same result of being like, wow, this really is the most effective approach. So that's why I'm really confident about the fact that once you join us, I think it will change your view.
I'm open to that. I want to try it. If I see it successful, I'll be unbiased. I will champion it even more so. At the same time, I want to be wary of not taking only these street experience data points, no matter how many there are, and ignoring research. I wouldn't do that either. And other point is we need other approaches around that. And again, my reducitarian approach is mostly for institutional change. Maybe one quick example of another tactic. I was just at the Plant-Based University summer camp where teams at universities are trying to convince the university to go plant-based. So their interaction with students at booths, at outreach booths, tables, is not, they don't say to people, we want to make you vegan. So it's completely different than what you're doing. They're asking for support for institutional change. They're asking for signatures so that the university changes their cafeteria. And by doing that, if they succeed at doing that, they would make it more easy. If the food is good and tasty, they would make it, I hope, more easy for you to go in there and do your outreach at that university. So that's a combination of, I think, that personal outreach and the institutional change around it.
I think to round this out, what I'll say is I think it's great that you're agreeing to go down to the cubes and actually do some on-the-ground research. And I think that's a good sign of good faith, and something that we need to see a lot more across our movement, is that when people disagree, that one side is willing to be like, do you know what, whatever it is, whether whether you're doing something and I've not checked it out, but it doesn't look very good. Okay, well, I'll just come and see. And if I still don't think it's good, then at least you've given it a good go, And I'd ask, maybe on the flip side of that, Paul, do you think you'd be willing to read Tobias's book?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
I would be. Because your book is called How to Create a Vegan World. So, of course, I'm wondering, how that's going for you. And also, if there's anything I can learn from you, because that's obviously my goal too.
Yeah, mm-hmm. So I think maybe we could revisit after you've both kind of gone through that process of fully understanding where each other is, whether going to the cube or reading the book. And actually, maybe when you meet at the cubes and stuff, you can talk about it more. Then we could revisit this in a year and see where you're both at then. Maybe that could be pretty cool.
No, I just want to say I think this was a productive discussion. I think it was all in good faith. I like differing in opinions in this way. I hope we can model it to some extent for other people, because again, there's so much less productive disagreement in the movement, and I think it's really important to differ in views, but to still trust each other.
Yeah, I'm willing to read your book. It would be cool if we actually sat down and recorded a conversation after your experience at the Cube. I can tell you that I can commit to reading your book by that point, because that would be next year when we do the campaign here in Amsterdam or in Europe. I'm pretty sure it'll be Amsterdam, but that'll be confirmed soon. So I think that would be a good place to carry this forward from here. All right, Tobias, nice to meet you.
Good to meet you. Good luck with everything.
And thanks for doing
I'm
this.
on your side. And thanks.
Thank you. And thank you both for coming on. And guys, make sure to get involved in the comments and let us know what you think.